You know that moment when your entire world shifts, and you realize the person standing next to you isn't who you thought they were? Well, for me, that moment happened on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And the person who shattered my reality wasn't my new husband. It was his mother. My name is Maya, and 3 years ago I thought I was living in a fairy tale. I was 28, killing it as a senior marketing director at one of the city's most prestigious agencies, and head over heels in love with David Chan. You know, the type: tall, charming, successful lawyer from old money. The kind of guy who opens doors and remembers your coffee order, and makes you feel like you're the only woman in the universe. David's family was intimidating, to say the least. The Chens had been running their law firm for 3 generations. Old money, old traditions, and a matriarch who ruled it all with an iron fist wrapped in Chanel. Patricia Chan was the kind of woman who could make grown men nervous with just a look, but she'd welcomed me into the family with open arms. Or so I thought. "Darling," Patricia had purred when we got engaged, "you just focus on your little job. I'll handle all the wedding details. The Chun family has certain standards to maintain." My little job. I should have caught that red flag, but I was so grateful. My parents died in a car crash when I was 22, and having Patricia step in felt like maybe, just maybe, I was getting a mother figure back in my life. Our wedding was spectacular: 500 guests at the city's most exclusive country club, flowers that cost more than most people's annual salary, and enough champagne to stock a small liquor store. I felt like royalty walking down that endless aisle toward David, who was actually crying tears of joy. But even on that perfect day, something felt off. Patricia kept pulling David aside for urgent family matters that apparently couldn't wait until after we said our vows. She introduced me to important guests as David's lovely bride, never by name, never mentioning that I had my own career, my own accomplishments. Like I was just an accessory to her son's life. During the reception, I overheard her chatting with David's great-aunt Margaret near the bar. "She's sweet enough," Patricia was saying, stirring her martini. "But you know how these career types are. So self-focused. I just pray she learns to put family first when it really matters." Career types. Like being successful was some kind of character flaw. But the moment that changed everything happened when I was coming back from the bridal suite, after touching up my lipstick. I heard Patricia's voice in the hallway, and something about her tone made me freeze. "Phase 1 is complete," she was saying into her phone. Her voice was completely different, cold, calculating. Nothing like the warm motherly tone she used around me. "The wedding went perfectly. Now we just need patience. Trust me, Sarah, this marriage won't survive 6 months. And when it crumbles, David will finally understand what kind of woman he actually needs." I stood there in my custom wedding gown, holding my bouquet of white peonies, feeling like the ground had just disappeared beneath my feet. Phase 1? What the hell was Phase 1? And who was Sarah? Every instinct screamed at me to confront her right there. Part of me wanted to march into that reception and announce to all 500 guests that the mother of the groom was already planning my divorce. But something held me back. Maybe shock, maybe some survival instinct I didn't know I had. Instead, I walked back into my own wedding reception, smiled through the congratulations, danced with my new husband, and pretended I hadn't just overheard my mother-in-law plotting the destruction of my marriage before we'd even cut the cake. But I remembered every single word. And I started watching everything else too. That night, alone with David in our honeymoon suite, I tested the waters. "Your mom seemed stressed tonight. She mentioned something about me needing to learn to put family first." David laughed, pulling me close. "Mom's just old school, babe. She thinks all women should be like her generation. Totally devoted to home and family. She'll adjust once she sees how amazing you are." I wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But that phone conversation kept playing in my mind on repeat. Phase 1 is complete. What exactly was Phase 2 going to look like? If you've never experienced death by 1,000 cuts disguised as loving concern, let me paint you a picture. Patricia was an absolute master of psychological warfare. The kind that leaves no visible bruises but destroys you from the inside out. It started so subtly I almost missed it. About 3 weeks after our honeymoon, Patricia began what I now call her worried mother-in-law routine. She'd call David at work, voice trembling with concern about something I'd supposedly said or done. Nothing dramatic, just tiny things that painted me as thoughtless or unstable. "David, sweetheart, I ran into Maya at Whole Foods yesterday and she seemed so distant. When I tried to invite her for lunch, she practically ran away from me. Is everything okay between you two? I'm worried she might be having trouble adjusting to married life." Here's the thing, I never saw Patricia at Whole Foods. She never invited me to lunch. But when David came home that evening, gently asking if I was feeling overwhelmed, if marriage was harder than I'd expected, I started questioning my own memory. Had I seen her and forgotten? Was I more stressed than I realized? Then came the discoveries. Patricia had a key to our apartment for emergencies, and she used it liberally. One afternoon, I came home to find her in our bedroom, looking mortified and holding a business card. "Oh Maya, honey," she said, her face the picture of concern. "I was just changing your sheets as a surprise, and this fell out from under the mattress. I think you should see this." The business card was for a private investigator. I'd never seen it before in my life, and I told her so. But Patricia just gave me this sad, sympathetic look that made my stomach turn. "Sweetheart, if you're having doubts about David, you should just talk to him. Hiring investigators. That's not healthy for a marriage. It shows such deep insecurity." By the time David got home, Patricia had already filled him in on her discovery, complete with tears about how worried she was about my mental state. I looked like the paranoid newlywed who was spying on her husband after 2 months of marriage. The worst part? I started doubting myself. When someone consistently questions your reality, your own memory becomes unreliable. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was struggling more than I thought. Maybe I really wasn't cut out for this family. Patricia's next strategy was even more insidious. She started sabotaging our social life while making it look like she was helping. She'd planned surprise family events on nights David and I had made plans with my friends. She'd book romantic weekend getaways for us during my biggest work deadlines. When I'd have to cancel or reschedule, she'd commiserate with David about how demanding my career was. "I just worry that Maya's job is becoming more important to her than her marriage," she'd say right in front of me, shaking her head sadly. Balance is so crucial in a relationship, don't you think? 6 months in, I barely recognized myself. I was second-guessing every decision, every reaction, every instinct. My work performance was slipping because I was constantly distracted by the drama at home. My friendships were strained from all the last-minute cancellations. And David was starting to look at me like I was a stranger he wasn't sure he liked. But the breaking point came during our first Christmas as a married couple. Patricia had orchestrated this elaborate family gathering at her mansion, complete with traditions I'd apparently never been told about and gift exchange rules that seemed designed to make me fail. Everything I did was wrong. Wrong wine, wrong outfit, gifts that were either too expensive or too cheap. Then Patricia brought out the family photo albums. "Oh, David," she sighed, flipping through pictures of him with his college girlfriend. "Remember when you and Rebecca went to Tuscany?" She was so natural with family traditions. Such an intuitive understanding of what it means to be a Chin. Page after page of David with Rebecca. Rebecca at family dinners looking perfectly at ease. Rebecca playing tennis with David's father. Rebecca wearing the family's antique pearl necklace, The same necklace Patricia had told me was too fragile for me to wear. I sat there watching my husband's face light up with nostalgia, while his mother systematically showed me everything I wasn't and would never be. When I finally excused myself to the bathroom to cry, I heard Patricia's voice through the door. I just think Rebecca understood what being part of this family meant. Some people are natural fits and others, well, they try so hard, but it's just not the same, is it? That night, David and I had our first real fight. He accused me of being jealous and insecure. I accused him of letting his mother manipulate him. We both said things we couldn't take back, and I slept in the guest room for the first time since our wedding. But lying there in that cold spare bed, something shifted inside me. I was done being the victim of Patricia's games. If she wanted to play psychological warfare, fine. But I was going to start playing to win. The next morning, I started my own investigation. You know what they say about desperate times calling for desperate measures? Well, I was about to get very desperate, and my measures were about to become very, very calculated. I started small, keeping a notebook hidden in my office desk where I documented every interaction with Patricia. Dates, times, witnesses present, exact quotes when I could remember them. I screenshot weird text messages, saved voicemails that didn't quite make sense, and started paying attention to patterns I'd been too hurt to notice before. But my real breakthrough came 3 months later, on a rainy Tuesday when David was out of town for a deposition. Patricia called that morning with one of her signature emergencies. She needed help organizing paperwork for a charity event. Could I possibly come over? She was just so overwhelmed, and she knew how organized I was. Every instinct told me it was a setup, but I was curious. What was Patricia really up to? At the mansion, she led me to her late husband's study, now converted into her personal office. The charity files are in the bottom drawer, she said, gesturing at the massive mahogany desk. I need to run to the bank, but please make yourself comfortable. She left so quickly it felt staged, like she wanted me to be alone in her private space. The charity files were exactly where she'd said, but they were perfectly organized, nothing that needed my help. In fact, they looked like they'd been prepared specifically for me to find, complete with color-coded tabs and neat labels. But it was the locked drawer at the bottom right that caught my attention. I need to be honest here. I'm not normally the type to snoop through other people's belongings. But 8 months of gaslighting had changed me. 8 months of being made to feel crazy and inadequate had turned me into someone I barely recognized. The lock was cheap, the kind you could open with a paperclip. I had it open in under a minute. What I found inside changed everything. Files. Detailed, organized files on every woman David had ever dated seriously. Not just basic information. Intimate details about their lives, their families, their personal struggles and insecurities. Photos, background checks, copies of social media posts, even what looked like surveillance pictures. Rebecca, the ex-girlfriend from Christmas, had her own thick folder. Patricia had documented Rebecca's family's financial problems, her mother's struggle with alcoholism, her anxiety issues. But the truly chilling part was Patricia's handwritten notes in the margins. Mention ours mother's drinking during family dinner, create doubt about family stability. Suggest David deserves someone less emotionally needy. Plan family events during ours panic attacks. There were folders for 4 other women David had dated before me. Each one systematically destroyed using the same playbook Patricia was running on me. And then I found my own folder. It was the thickest one yet. Patricia had been collecting information about me since before David and I were even engaged. She knew about my parents' accident, my student loans, my previous relationships, even my therapy sessions after my parents died. Her strategic notes made my hands shake. M is isolated due to deceased parents. Exploit this vulnerability. Career ambitions make her defensive. Use this against David. Previous relationship ended due to partners cheating. Plant seeds of doubt about Dee's faithfulness. There was an actual timeline for destroying my marriage. Phase 1. Establish doubt about Maya's commitment to family. Phase 2. Isolate Maya from support systems and create marital conflict. Phase 3. Manufacture crisis to justify divorce. According to her notes, we were halfway through Phase 2. I photographed everything with trembling hands, then kept searching. In the very back, I found something that broke my heart, a letter from Rebecca, written 6 months after her breakup with David. Dear Mrs. Chun, it read, I wanted to thank you for helping me see David's true character, even though it's been incredibly painful. I spent the last months of our relationship feeling like I was losing my mind, questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was too damaged to love properly. Your insights about David's need for someone more stable really opened my eyes, even though it hurt to hear. I know you were just looking out for your son, but I can't help wondering if maybe David and I could have worked through our issues if the family dynamics had been different. I really did love him. Rebecca Patricia had destroyed that relationship deliberately, just like she was destroying mine. And Rebecca had thanked her for it. I was still holding Rebecca's letter when I heard Patricia's car in the driveway. I quickly photographed it, put everything back exactly as I'd found it, and grabbed the charity files just as she walked in. How's everything going, dear? She asked, her voice syrupy sweet. I looked at this woman who had been systematically destroying my life for 8 months and smiled. Perfect, I said. I'm finding everything I need. That night I didn't confront David. I didn't scream or demand explanations. Instead, I sat in our apartment, scrolling through the photos on my phone, and made a decision that would change everything. If Patricia wanted to play games, I'd play games. But I was going to play to win. And I was going to make sure she never did this to another woman again. Once you realize you're in a war, everything changes. The rules, the stakes, the very person you thought you were. Patricia had spent months systematically dismantling my life, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. My first move was creating my own intelligence operation. I bought a small fireproof safe and started building comprehensive files on Patricia and David. Every manipulation got documented with dates, times, photos, and audio recordings when possible. I installed discrete recording apps on my phone and started wearing a small voice recorder during family gatherings. But I also did something Patricia never expected. I started investigating her. See, my marketing background had given me an extensive network of contacts, including a friend who worked at a corporate investigation firm. Over coffee, I explained that I needed deep background information on someone, and I needed it done quietly and thoroughly. This is about protecting myself, I told her. I think someone's been manipulating me, but I need proof before I make any moves. The investigation into Patricia Chun revealed fascinating information. David's father hadn't died peacefully of natural causes as I'd been told. He'd suffered a massive heart attack during bitter divorce proceedings that Patricia had initiated after discovering his affair with a young paralegal from his firm. But here's what made my blood run cold. The paralegal bore a striking resemblance to Rebecca. And to me. Young, ambitious, career-focused women who threatened Patricia's control over the men in her life. The financial investigation was even more revealing. Patricia's lifestyle was being maintained through credit and loans that were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. The mansion, the country club memberships, the designer wardrobe. It was all a house of cards built on mounting debt. Most importantly, the investigation uncovered David's own secrets. My husband had been involved in questionable financial dealings at his law firm. Nothing that would definitely get him disbarred, but enough gray area to cause serious problems if it ever came to light. And Patricia knew about it. Armed with this information, I began phase 1 of my counterattack, securing my independence and building my case. I threw myself into work with laser focus. The marketing campaign I'd been developing was already showing strong results, but I pushed harder. I worked longer hours, took on additional high-visibility projects, and made myself indispensable. Within 4 months, I'd been promoted to executive director with a substantial salary increase and equity options. More importantly, I'd been headhunted by 3 other firms, giving me leverage and options I'd never had before. I also started rebuilding my support network carefully and strategically. Patricia had successfully isolated me from some friends, but not all of them. I reached out to old colleagues, former classmates, and industry contacts. I joined professional organizations and started attending networking events again. But my most important move was reaching out to Rebecca. It took weeks to find her contact information, but I finally tracked her down through LinkedIn. I sent a carefully worded message explaining that I was David's current wife and had some concerns about family dynamics. Could we possibly meet for coffee? Rebecca agreed, and our conversation confirmed my worst fears. I thought I was going crazy, she told me over lattes at a quiet cafe downtown. Patricia was so subtle at first, just little comments about how David needed someone more stable, more family-oriented. Then she started sharing these concerns about my mental health with David, pointing out every time I seemed anxious or overwhelmed. Rebecca described the exact same campaign Patricia was running on me. The planted evidence, the manufactured emergencies, the systematic isolation from friends and family. The worst part, Rebecca continued, tears in her eyes, was that letter I wrote thanking her for opening my eyes about David. I was so gaslit by then that I actually believed she was helping me see the truth about my relationship. It wasn't until therapy that I realized how manipulated I'd been. I showed Rebecca the photos I'd taken of Patricia's files, including her own folder with all the strategic notes about exploiting her vulnerabilities. Rebecca stared at the evidence in shock. She documented everything, Rebecca whispered. She turned my anxiety into a weapon against me. That meeting with Rebecca was a turning point. She agreed to provide a detailed statement about Patricia's manipulation tactics, and she helped me contact 2 other ex-girlfriends who'd experienced similar treatment. Sarah Walsh, who dated David for 8 months, described how Patricia had manufactured evidence of drug use to end their relationship. Lisa Kim shared how Patricia had convinced David that Lisa was using him for financial security, citing Lisa's student loans as evidence of her gold digger mentality. The pattern was unmistakable. Patricia had been systematically destroying David's relationships for years, using personalized psychological warfare tactics tailored to each woman's specific vulnerabilities. But phase 2 of my plan required something bigger than just exposing Patricia's manipulation. I needed to find a way to stop her permanently, to ensure she could never do this to another woman again. That's when I discovered Patricia's own vulnerability, her upcoming engagement to Richard Blackwood. Richard was a wealthy widower who owned a chain of successful restaurants. Patricia had been dating him for 6 months, playing the grieving widow role perfectly. But my investigation revealed that Richard's first wife hadn't died of cancer as Patricia believed. She died by suicide after discovering Richard's gambling addiction and the massive debts he'd hidden from her. Richard was just as much of a fraud as Patricia was. They were perfect for each other. More importantly, their relationship gave me the perfect opportunity for my final gambit. Because I'd also discovered something Patricia didn't know. I knew David's financial crimes weren't just unethical, they were federal felonies. And I had detailed evidence of Patricia's role in encouraging and covering up those crimes. Patricia thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. What she didn't realize was that I'd been learning her game all along, and I was about to flip the entire board. By the time Patricia launched phase 3 of her master plan, I was ready for her. More than ready. I was 10 steps ahead with a counter-strategy that would destroy her more completely than she could ever imagine. Patricia's final crisis was, I have to admit, masterfully executed. She'd escalated from planting evidence to actually hiring people to create compromising situations. A male model, paid to approach me at professional events and act overly familiar. Photos taken from misleading angles that made innocent networking conversations look romantic. Text messages sent from burner phones, designed to look like I was coordinating secret affairs. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening in March, almost exactly 2 years after our wedding. David had prepared a whole presentation, printed photos, screenshots of fake text messages, even a timeline of my supposed infidelity. I know you're cheating, Maya, he said, his voice cold and rehearsed. I have proof. I think it's time we both admitted this marriage was a mistake. Here's what Patricia didn't expect: my complete agreement. You're absolutely right, I said calmly. This marriage was a mistake. I want a divorce, and I want to proceed as quickly as possible. David blinked, clearly thrown. He'd prepared for tears, denials, desperate bargaining. He hadn't prepared for immediate capitulation. What he didn't know was that I'd already filed preliminary paperwork with my own attorney, definitely not from the Chan family firm. I'd been preparing for this moment for months, documenting everything, securing my assets, and positioning myself for the most favorable outcome possible. Within 3 weeks, I'd moved into a stunning loft downtown and negotiated a settlement that left me financially secure. David was so relieved I wasn't going to fight him that he agreed to terms that were incredibly favorable to me. Patricia was ecstatic. Phase 3 had been completed successfully. Another unsuitable woman had been removed from her son's life. But what Patricia didn't realize was that the divorce was actually the beginning of my real plan, not the end of it. While she'd been focused on destroying my marriage, I'd been building something much more dangerous. A comprehensive federal case against both her and David. The financial crimes I discovered weren't just serious. They were prosecutable under federal law. David had been embezzling from client trust accounts to maintain his expensive lifestyle and help Patricia cover her mounting debts. The amounts weren't huge, but they were systematic and well documented. More importantly, I'd found evidence that Patricia wasn't just aware of the embezzlement. She was actively directing it. Email exchanges between them discussed which client accounts would be safest to borrow from. Bank records showed regular transfers from David's firm to Patricia's personal accounts. Phone recordings captured conversations about covering their tracks and manipulating financial records. It was conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, federal crimes that carried serious prison time. But I couldn't just turn this information over to authorities. Patricia had been careful to create plausible deniability around her involvement. I needed a way to expose both of them simultaneously, in a manner that would be impossible to dismiss or cover up. I needed their guard to be completely down. I needed them to feel safe and victorious. I needed Patricia's wedding. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, Patricia announced her engagement to Richard Blackwood. The wedding was planned for the following spring at the same country club where David and I had been married. Patricia's idea of poetic justice, I'm sure. The guest list would include judges, politicians, business leaders, and society figures. The perfect audience for their downfall. But I had one more card to play that Patricia didn't know about. During my investigation, I discovered that Richard's first wife hadn't died of cancer as Patricia believed. Margaret Blackwood had committed suicide after discovering Richard's gambling addiction and the massive debts he'd been hiding from her. Richard had covered up the suicide, claiming cancer to protect his reputation and his business. Richard was just as much of a fraud as Patricia was. Their entire relationship was built on lies. I made sure Patricia received all the documentation about Richard's real financial situation and his wife's actual cause of death, anonymously of course, and time to arrive 3 days before their wedding. But I also made sure Richard received detailed information about Patricia's manipulation tactics, her role in David's financial crimes, and her pattern of destroying her son's relationships. I wanted both of them to know exactly who they were marrying, and I wanted them to have that knowledge at the worst possible moment. The week before the wedding, I finalized my cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. In exchange for my testimony and evidence, I received full immunity and witness protection if needed. The arrest warrants were prepared and ready to execute. All I had to do was give the signal. On the morning of Patricia's wedding, I woke up in my beautiful loft, put on a navy dress that photographed well, and prepared to attend the event that would destroy my former mother-in-law's life forever. Patricia thought she'd won by destroying my marriage. What she didn't understand was that losing David had been the best thing that ever happened to me. It had freed me to become someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Today, she was going to find out exactly who she'd been messing with. I've always believed that the best revenge is served with perfect timing, and Patricia's wedding day was about to become a masterclass in poetic justice. The morning was gorgeous, one of those crisp spring days where everything seems to sparkle with possibility. I took my time getting ready, choosing every detail carefully. Navy dress that was elegant but not attention-grabbing. Professional makeup that would look good on camera. Jewelry expensive enough to show I was thriving. I wanted to look like a success. Like someone who had not only survived Patricia's psychological warfare, but had emerged stronger because of it. The country club looked spectacular, decorated with thousands of white roses and cascading greenery. Patricia had spared no expense, which was darkly ironic considering she was essentially bankrupt. But then again, spending other people's money had always been her specialty. I arrived exactly on time, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to make an entrance. Just another wedding guest attending what everyone expected to be the social event of the season. The guest list was everything I'd anticipated. Federal judges, city council members, business leaders, society wives who control charity boards and country club committees. Patricia had assembled the perfect audience for maximum impact. I spotted David immediately, looking handsome in his expensive tux, playing the devoted son role perfectly. He was chatting with colleagues from his law firm, probably celebrating how much happier he was without his unstable ex-wife. Patricia looked radiant in her ivory designer gown, her smile brilliant as she greeted guests during cocktail hour. When she saw me, surprise flashed across her face before she recovered with practiced grace. "Maya, darling," she exclaimed, air-kissing me like we were old friends. "How wonderful that you could make it. You look well." The pause before well was calculated, designed to suggest I didn't actually look well at all. Even on her wedding day, Patricia couldn't resist a small cruelty. "Thank you, Patricia," I replied with genuine warmth. "You look absolutely stunning. Richard is truly lucky." He was about to get very lucky, indeed lucky enough to discover exactly who he was marrying before the ink dried on their marriage certificate. The ceremony was picture perfect. Patricia and Richard exchanged vows written by the same wedding planner who'd handled the flowers. Generic promises about love and devotion that would have been touching if they weren't coming from two people who specialized in deception. I sat in the back, watching Patricia beam as she promised to love and cherish Richard for all the days of her life. The same woman who had spent years destroying other people's relationships was now playing the blushing bride. The irony was almost too perfect. During the reception dinner, I excused myself to make a crucial phone call. "It's time," I told the federal prosecutor. Patricia just finished her speech. David's giving his toast in 5 minutes. That's your window. I returned to my table just as David stood to address the crowd. He prepared what I'm sure he thought was a touching tribute to his mother and her new husband. My mother has always been my greatest advocate, he said, raising his champagne glass toward Patricia. She's taught me the value of loyalty, the importance of protecting family, and the strength that comes from knowing someone will always support you. The audience murmured appreciatively. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, the picture of maternal pride. But I wasn't listening to David's speech anymore. I was watching the entrance, waiting for the moment that would change everything. It happened exactly when it was supposed to. Four federal agents entered the reception hall just as David was concluding his toast. They moved with quiet purpose, scanning the room until they located their targets. David Chun, the lead agent called out clearly. David froze mid-sentence, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his lips. Every conversation in the room stopped. The silence was deafening. You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, the agent announced, approaching the head table with handcuffs ready. Chaos erupted instantly. Guests jumped to their feet, some trying to get a better view, others pulling out phones to record. Patricia's face went from confusion to horror as she watched her son being arrested at her own wedding reception. There must be some mistake, Richard stammered, but the agents were already reading David his rights. The charges were extensive, multiple counts of stealing from client accounts, falsifying financial records, conspiracy to defraud. But the real shock came when a second agent approached Patricia. Patricia Chun, you're also under arrest as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. Patricia's champagne flute shattered against the marble floor. What? I don't understand. I haven't done anything wrong. The agents had done their homework thoroughly. They had the email exchanges discussing which client accounts to target. They had bank records showing transfers from David's firm to Patricia's accounts. They had recorded phone conversations where she encouraged the embezzlement and helped plan cover-ups. As both Patricia and David were led away in handcuffs, the wedding reception descended into complete chaos. Richard stood at the head table looking shell-shocked, watching his new wife being arrested for financial crimes she'd been committing for years. The media was already gathering outside. The story was breaking on social media in real time. #WeddingArrest was trending within an hour. But I wasn't finished yet. As the initial shock subsided and guests began processing what they'd witnessed, I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. I apologize for interrupting what should have been a beautiful celebration, I said, my voice carrying across the stunned room. But I think there are some things you should know about the woman who was just arrested at her own wedding. Every eye in the room focused on me, including the news cameras that had followed the police inside. Patricia Chun didn't just help her son steal money from his clients, I continued. She spent years systematically destroying the lives of every woman David dated. She kept detailed files on us, documenting our personal information and planning strategic campaigns to break up our relationships. I pulled out copies of Patricia's manipulation files, the evidence I'd photographed 2 years earlier. She planned psychological warfare tactics designed to make us appear unstable and unworthy. She manufactured evidence, planted seeds of doubt, and manipulated situations to drive us away. I handed the files to Jennifer, Richard's daughter, who had gone pale reading Patricia's calculated notes and strategies. Rebecca Morrison, David's college girlfriend, suffered a nervous breakdown because of Patricia's manipulation, I said, looking directly at guests who had known Rebecca. Sarah Walsh was driven away by manufactured evidence of drug use. Lisa Kim was painted as a gold digger because of her student loans. The room was absolutely silent now. Everyone was staring, processing the implications of what I was revealing. Patricia Chan is a predator who destroys women for sport, I concluded. She spent years perfecting psychological abuse tactics that left her victims questioning their own sanity. And now she's your problem, Richard. I walked out of that reception hall with my head held high, leaving behind a room full of shocked guests, a devastated groom, and the complete wreckage of Patricia's carefully constructed life. Outside, news vans were already setting up for live broadcasts. The story would be everywhere within hours. The society wedding that ended in federal arrests, the mother-in-law who masterminded financial crimes, the systematic psychological abuse of multiple women over multiple years. Patricia's reputation was destroyed forever. David's legal career was over. Their crimes would be front-page news for weeks. But more importantly, every woman who had ever doubted her own sanity because of Patricia's manipulation now had validation. Every woman who had been made to feel inadequate would see that sometimes, the problem really isn't you. Sometimes, the problem is the person trying to convince you that you're the problem. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my corner office on the 32nd floor of the city's newest skyscraper, looking out at the skyline and reflecting on how completely my life has transformed. The story of Patricia's wedding arrest became legendary in our city and beyond. It was covered by major news outlets, analyzed on social media for months, and turned into a case study about psychological manipulation and financial fraud. The footage of Patricia being led away in handcuffs from her own reception went viral globally, spawning discussions about toxic family dynamics and emotional abuse. David was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. The judge was particularly harsh because of the betrayal of trust involved, stealing from clients who had relied on him to protect their financial interests. His law license was permanently revoked, his assets were seized for restitution, and his professional reputation was obliterated. Patricia received 4 years for her role as an accessory in conspiracy charges. But the legal consequences were nothing compared to the social devastation. Her entire world collapsed overnight. Country club memberships, charity board positions, society connections, everything disappeared. No one wanted any association with someone exposed as a master manipulator on such a public stage. Richard had their marriage annulled within days of the arrests. He'd been genuinely shocked to discover Patricia's true character and her involvement in financial crimes. The revelation that his new wife was a psychological predator who had been planning to use him, just like she'd used everyone else, was devastating. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state to escape the scandal. But the most meaningful consequence wasn't the legal or social destruction of Patricia and David. It was what happened with the other women she had victimized over the years. Rebecca reached out to me 3 weeks after the story broke. We met for coffee, and she looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I spent 4 years thinking I was crazy, she told me, tears streaming down her face. I was in therapy for 2 years trying to understand why I couldn't handle a normal relationship. Finding out it was all deliberate manipulation. It's been life-changing. Rebecca wasn't alone. Sarah, Lisa, and 2 other women I hadn't even known about came forward after seeing the news coverage. Each one had experienced the same systematic psychological warfare, and each one had spent years blaming herself for the relationship's failure. Together, we created a support group for Patricia's victims. We called it Phoenix Rising, because we were all rebuilding ourselves from the ashes of her destruction. The group became so helpful that we formalized it into a nonprofit organization, focused on helping women recognize and recover from psychological manipulation. The media attention around our case sparked broader conversations about emotional abuse and family manipulation that I never expected. I was invited to speak at conferences about recognizing gaslighting tactics, A major publisher offered me a book deal to tell the full story. A documentary filmmaker wanted to explore the psychology of systematic manipulation. I said yes to everything. Because Patricia's greatest weapon had always been secrecy. The ability to gaslight her victims into believing they were imagining things or overreacting to normal family dynamics. By exposing her tactics publicly, we took away her power to hurt anyone else. My professional life exploded in the best possible way. The strategic thinking and investigation skills I developed during my counter-campaign against Patricia impressed some very important people in my industry. I was headhunted by the city's most prestigious marketing firm and offered a partnership track that would make me financially independent for life. But more than career success, I discovered capabilities I never knew I had. The insecure woman who had let Patricia manipulate her for months was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood power dynamics, who could think strategically long-term, who refused to be anyone's victim ever again. I'd also learned the crucial difference between being alone and being independent. Patricia had tried to isolate me by destroying my marriage and support systems, but in rebuilding my life on my own terms, I discovered that I didn't need anyone else's approval or validation to be happy and successful. That said, I wasn't completely alone. 8 months after Patricia's arrest, I started dating Marcus, one of the federal prosecutors who had worked on the case. He was brilliant, ethical, and genuinely fascinated by my strategic planning abilities. "I've prosecuted hundreds of fraud cases," he told me over dinner one night. "But I've never seen someone execute such a comprehensive long-term strategy for justice." It was like watching a master class in patience and precision. Marcus understood what I'd been through because he'd seen the evidence firsthand. He'd reviewed Patricia's manipulation files, studied her psychological warfare tactics, and witnessed the systematic nature of her abuse. There was no explaining to do, no convincing him that I hadn't been paranoid or oversensitive. More importantly, Marcus respected the fact that I'd fought back intelligently. He didn't see me as a victim who needed rescuing. He saw me as a formidable strategist who had outmaneuvered a master manipulator and emerged victorious. "What impressed me most," he said recently, "wasn't just that you got justice for yourself. It's that you made sure Patricia could never do this to anyone else again. You didn't just win, you protected future victims." He was absolutely right. That had always been the most important part of my plan. Patricia's arrest and public exposure had ended her ability to destroy other women's lives. The tactics that had worked on Rebecca, Sarah, Lisa, and me wouldn't work anymore because everyone knew about them now. Sometimes people ask me if I have any regrets about how everything played out. If I wish I'd handled things differently, tried to work things out with David, given Patricia another chance. The answer is simple. Absolutely not. I lost a husband who had never really loved me enough to see through his mother's manipulation. But I gained something infinitely more valuable. The unshakable knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to outmaneuver anyone who tried to hurt me, and brave enough to fight for justice, even when it required enormous personal sacrifice. These days, when young women ask me for advice about dealing with toxic family members or manipulative in-laws, I tell them 4 crucial things. First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, even if you can't prove it yet. Your intuition is trying to protect you. Listen to it. Second, document everything. Keep records, save messages, write down conversations with dates and times. Build your case methodically, because emotional manipulators rely on your inability to prove their behavior. Third, maintain your independence at all costs. Don't let anyone isolate you from your career, your friends, or your financial resources. The moment you become completely dependent on someone else is the moment you become vulnerable to their control. And fourth, Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove toxic people from your life permanently, even if they're family. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to abuse you, manipulate you, or try to destroy your happiness. Patricia thought she was teaching me about family loyalty and knowing my place. What she actually taught me was that I deserve better than people who try to make me smaller, and that I'm strong enough to fight for the life I want. That's a lesson I carry with me every single day. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working in my beautiful office or relaxing in my peaceful apartment, I think about Patricia in her prison cell, probably still wondering how her perfect plan went so catastrophically wrong. How the quiet, insecure daughter-in-law she'd been systematically destroying had managed to turn the tables so completely. I hope she's figured it out by now. I hope she understands that she didn't lose because I got lucky, or because she made one careless mistake. She lost because she fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. She saw a victim where there was actually a survivor. She saw weakness where there was hidden strength. She saw someone she could control where there was someone who would ultimately control her fate. Patricia spent years perfecting the art of psychological manipulation. But she forgot one crucial rule of warfare: never underestimate your enemy. And that, ultimately, was the biggest mistake of her life. I rebuilt myself stronger, smarter, and more successful than I'd ever been before Patricia tried to destroy me. I found love with someone who respected my strength instead of trying to diminish it. I built a career that gave me financial independence and professional recognition. Most importantly, I helped ensure that Patricia's other victims got the validation and healing they deserved, and that her tactics were exposed publicly, so she could never use them again. That's not just revenge. That's justice. And justice, served with perfect timing and strategic precision, is the sweetest satisfaction of all.